we've all been hearing about Trump 2.0 almost every day, right? Probably more than you would like to. So today, we try to go a bit deeper to decode, as the title suggests, the headlines, and try to speak about what it all means for Japan and for the rest of the world. And for that, we have an excellent panel today, and I'm looking forward to hear your insights from each vantage point. Joshua, you hear us, right? Okay, good. So I'm thinking of having 3 parts today for the discussion. 1, US domestic politics. 2, Trump's foreign policy and the world. And 3, US-Japan relations and Japan's role. So let's get right into it. Part 1 is US domestic politics. And let me start with you, Mark. If you could paint a big picture of where the country stands now in terms of society, economy, but mostly politics. We hear so much about the drastic approaches of Trump and the divisions, deep divisions getting deeper and deeper because of those policies. But what about the results that his policies are bringing to people's lives, especially on 2 issues that people care most about, the economy and border security?
It's great to be with you here. If you think about domestically, yes, there's a lot of changes going on, and Trump has always been a base politician, so he's playing to his base on nearly everything he does, whether it's culturally, economically, or other issues. But if you think of the 2 big things from a domestic perspective, has been the border has been a big concern for a long time, not just in America, but around the world, border, immigration. And the very significant actions he's taken on there are perceived as actually working and closing off the kind of illegal, as they called immigration, but also with the actions he's taken and going after the cities is also creating a tough on crime reputation that is also something that his base is very appreciative of. Always overreach risk, always an impact on independent voters. But the other big thing that's going on is in reindustrialization. And if you think about the unleashing of the tech companies and the huge amount of tech investment going on in America, unleashing carbon energy and oil, significant increase in employment there as well. But we've had both a tax bill that successfully got through the Congress that is creating a pull for reindustrialization, and tariffs that he, in a blizzard of going around the world, including in Japan, has created more of a push to want to invest in America. He also has had on areas of vulnerability. We're too dependent on some folks like China and others on chips and pharmaceuticals to have sort of tariff-specific pushes on those to get more investment in the U.S. You have a sense that there is increased investment going on in the U.S. The borders are becoming addressed. Those are the good sides. The big risk in all that is, will it impact inflation? The tax bill also aggravated the debt. Will there be a bond revolt? There are risks, but there is also significant steps forward in the minds of at least his base.
Thank you for that. Let me go to Joshua in New York. Given the pretext that Mark has just provided, how do you sense the shift, or if any, of the support for Trump within the country, and how is that translating into politics as you approach to the election year?
Komboa from New York to everyone. I'm sorry if it's a little bit dark. There's a big storm happening outside, so hopefully my power doesn't get lost. But it's really great to be with you. I really wish I was there in person. This is an amazing group of individuals and friends, and I wouldn't miss it if I'm allowed to join virtually. Junko-san, you asked a great question. Let me just kind of build off where Mark left off. There's a lot more to say, but let's just be clear. It's Sunday night here in America. It's all about football today. And I think the red team, the Republicans, came in and they had a game plan and they had a strategy. And President Trump learned from his last term and came in and he flooded the zone. He literally came in and did things that no one thought was possible because many of it was unprecedented. It didn't seem to be the right way to do it. He kind of had a very direct, very non-political, non-diplomatic approach to things. But in many ways, he succeeded. And there has been really no opposition to prevent the president from executing on almost everything, from immigration to tariffs. And I think Japan is left wondering, where is the America we used to know? And I guess my message is pretty clear here. The America you thought you knew has been changing for a very long time now. I don't believe that President Trump is this unique kind of unicorn that changed everything by his own personality. Now, he certainly has those qualities and he's done things that no one else except for Trump could do in terms of taking heat, et cetera. But I think what Japan needs to understand is this is a symptom of something much larger and there's a cause there. And as Japan struggles to figure out how to deal with President Trump, you first have to understand where America is. America is in a direct mood of feeling like we spent 80 years building an international order and it hasn't actually served the average American. The people that elected Donald Trump were not happy with globalization. They were not happy with the free trade world. And they are now beginning to figure out what that looks like. And by all accounts, at least over the last 8 to 9 months, there has not been all the kind of concern that the globalists said. Everyone thought that on Liberation Day in April, that when President Trump declared these tariffs, that the entire economy would be destroyed. America's economy would shrink. We've seen the opposite. America is booming in many different ways. Now, that's the bad news if you don't like Trump. It's good news if you like Trump. I think for Japanese, given your own domestic politics, we can talk about later, it's a real problem because if you don't know how to manage Trump and you don't have a Shinzo Abe, you're in big trouble. And let me just say that traditionally, we would be looking at the midterms in 2026 as like our real bellwether. I'm here in New York. We have a mayor's race coming up that normally doesn't matter very much, but this time around it matters because Democrats are fighting among themselves to decide if they're either democratic, socialist, and communist, or what people used to be more on the center left. And then meanwhile, you have Virginia and New Jersey that have elections with governors that are probably putting a different version of a Democrat. So, from Trump's perspective, everything is going his way. Popularity is kind of up and down, but at the end of the day, it's about results. And when you look at the results of the American economy and what the tariffs are doing, in a very short-sighted, narrow, transactional way, which is the way we have to think about this president, he's winning in what he said he was going to do. He has delivered on those promises. So purely from that point of view, even if you don't like them and you don't agree with it, we don't have an alternative to stop the red team. They continue to advance. But again, the only good news here is it's only the first quarter. We've got some more quarters to go.
Thank you for that. Glenn, you have been active on the blue team for a long time. Where are they? Does anyone have a grand strategy to counter Trump? And any new leaders coming up? And what's your bold prediction for the midterm election?
So I'm glad to be back in Japan. I was in Washington, D.C. the last 13 years, but just last month moved to Stanford University to be visiting fellow because I find Washington to be quite dysfunctional. But with that as a background, let me say that I guess I would like to say three things. The first is that, as Joshua mentioned, it's quite true that Trump is having a string of victories, in part because the White House and the Senate and the House and the Supreme Court are all to the Republicans' advantage. I think that the Republican Party, I don't know if Mark agrees with it, but the Republican Party has pretty much become a Trump party. So under the normal checks and balances, you would expect that the Congress and the Supreme Court might check the president, but that's not happening. It's the district courts and the courts of appeal that are giving some pushback to Trump, especially on issues like cutting funding for agencies, government agencies, and also for cutting or trying to restrict universities like Harvard University. But right now, I think it is true that Trump is doing pretty well. Now, how long this is going to last is a big question. I think inflation certainly is an issue, and the midterms, to answer Junko's question, I think most people were expecting that, as is usual in the case of a midterm election, that the party out of power will gain. And since there are only 5-seat difference now in the House, I think most people had been expecting that at least the House would go Democratic majority. But President Trump is very conscious about this, and he's actually concerned that that may happen. And so he's got the Texas legislature to gerrymander to make sure that 5 seats are in favor of Republicans. And to counter that, Gavin Newsom in California is trying to do the same to take the advantage to the Democrats. Now, the Republicans are, I think, in Missouri and Florida and Indiana and I think Ohio, trying to, unlike every 10 years, which is usually the case based on the census, midstream trying to change the allocation so that basically gerrymandering to advantage Republicans. So I think at this point it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen on the House, the midterms. I think still there's an advantage for the Democrats, in part because of the unpopularity of the big, beautiful bill that Trump and the Republicans have passed. The other thing I'd say that on the Senate side, it's very difficult to expect that the Senate will go Democratic because in the last election, Republicans gained 4 seats. Democrats may be able to gain 2 or maybe even 3, but I think 4 is quite difficult. So I think the midterms will probably go in favor, hopefully, in my view, for the Democrats. Now, longer term, I think in 2028, I think the Democrats are hopeful that if the Democrats take the majority in the House in the midterms, that will give them subpoena power to hold hearings, to hold investigations, even to start impeachment proceedings in some cases. Anyway, to take the initiative, because right now the Democrats have not been able to do that. I think the Democrats' hope is that because Democrats have about at least 5 or more popular governors who will probably run, and a pretty strong bench of candidates who would have run in 2024 had Biden stepped aside after 1 term, as many were hoping. But anyway, I think right now things are a little uncertain, but I think the general view is that Democrats have the advantage for the midterm elections.
That's going to slow down Trump if Democrats
definitely.
win.
I mean, definitely, it will slow him down in terms of what he's trying to do on all fronts. I think whether it's immigration or whether it's border control or whether it's tariff issues or other. The one area I think foreign policy is difficult for the Congress to hold back Trump in the short term. But I think on most of the domestic issues, I think it will slow him down considerably if the Democrats take the majority in the House.
Mark, do you have a different take from the Republican side?
Well, first of all, I don't mean to speak on the Republican side. You know, as an academic, we are very nonpartisan. But I would just say 2 things. Having control of a chamber will restrict the ability of what Trump can do. And I think part of what you see with this frenetic action that you heard Joshua speak of, it's because a concern that they would only have 2 years of running all the seats of power. So there's a big push in the event that the Democrats do take the House. And I think I would agree with Glenn that it's more likely that they would have a chance of taking the House and the Senate. But I think it's really a push. I don't think we know who's going to win. And if they do not take the House, you're going to have another 2 years controlling all the levers of power. And let's recognize that on the Republican side, this only happens like once every 80 years. So if it's different than the America you know, it's because if somebody's controlled all the levers of power, it's more typically been the Democrats than the Republicans, and we have a very unusual mix of power control within Washington. It is creating an unusual sort of belief on the right that they have to catch up for all those years that they didn't have control.
Kazuto, looking from Japan, we hear so much about the crisis of democracy in the US. Is this the crisis of democracy, or is this the new normal? And another fundamental question is this just Trump? And is this just the US?
Right. First of all, we do have our own crisis of democracy in Japan. So, I don't know if which one is bad or better. I mean, I think all of the democracies, including Japan, United States, and the European countries, are facing the sort of similar problems one way or another. I think it is a change of demography. Demography on the one hand, the democratic regime which was established in 80 years ago after World War II has just faded away of its origins, and I think after the COVID, people realized that there are crisis of globalization, and there are a lot of things that appeared in during the COVID time that there are so much gap between those people who are affluent enough and those who are not, and they have a different responses to their responses to the issues. And also because of the emergence of China, the changing of the economic balances, there are, the so-called the elephant curve that is creating more, wealthy people in the advanced economy is getting wealthier, but the middle class in the advanced economy is getting lower, and they are not benefited from the globalization. So this is what Josh and Glenn has mentioned. I think this is similar to all countries, and this is a sort of a reflection of what's happening, and democracy is tend to reflect all these dynamic and structural changes. Is this limited only to Trump? I don't know, but if you look, imagine that in 2028, when the Democratic candidate goes to, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and say, I want to promote WTO, I want to join back to TPP, I want to promote the globalization. I don't think that candidate will win. So it doesn't matter if it's Democrats or Republicans. I think this is an American economics, the political system and electoral system just basically encourages the candidates to explore more opportunities, to appeal to those people who are just losing out from the globalization. So I think this negative thought is more amplified in the U.S. election system. So it's more than just it's more critical to in the United States compared to other democracies.
Thank you. We can talk all day about the domestic politics, but now that you mentioned about the issue of globalization, it's time to move to the second part, which is the foreign policy and the world. Mark, let me start with you again. How do you evaluate Trump's foreign policy so far, especially what he calls himself the deal-making skills and peacemaking skills?
Well, I'll address both the deal-making and the peacemaking, but I want to key off of something Joshua said about a world order only lasts so long as the dominant power views that it's beneficial for them. The United States came out of World War II as the dominant hyperpower and more as a free gift to the world It gave, sort of guaranteed security, open markets, and the dominant dollar. But now America is not the overwhelming dominant power. It faces a peer competitor, unlike any since its founding when we faced the Brits. But if you look at China relative to America in economic, political, diplomatic, military terms, we've never faced a competitor like this. So America is saying we need to be stronger, and that means our allies need to be stronger. So if you think about much of what he has done in his deal-making focus has been saying, you could either view it through the lens of fairness for America. Is it fair that Japan's only spending 1% of its GDP on defense, yet we're expected to defend them? Is it fair that countries like Japan and Germany are perennially sending surplus to America, and we're facing a deficit in part, they would say, because by maintaining a strong dollar, that hurts us from a trade perspective, so therefore at 15% across the board is, in their logic, saying that's just offsetting the detriment of having a strong dollar policy. So I think you see him coming at it from this fairness, but less talked about is saying, if we're going to preserve what we all generally believe on together, our values, freedom, openness, empowering citizens as opposed to controlling them, America needs Japan to be stronger. America needs NATO to be stronger. America needs Middle East to be stepping up and taking care of their own challenges as opposed to always looking for America to do that. And in that sense, he's advanced it, whether it be the tariffs, whether it be getting allies to invest more in their own defense. And this is all focused on China. So you've also seen a very strong approach towards China, whether it be tech controls or otherwise. So he to date, though, his deal making have been in these bilateral situations where America is by far the dominant player. The real game is coming. How will he be able to do vis-a-vis China? And you see a lot of frenetic action playing up to the APEC meeting. A lot of, just recently, within recent weeks, America upping the tech restrictions, Japan upping the rare earth restrictions, and many others are sort of just pre-moves before the meeting coming up in APEC. From a peacemaking, he tried nice with Russia, that didn't work. Now you're seeing him revert back to more traditional policy. Just recently, you may have seen that with supposed American help, Ukraine was able to hit another refinery deep within Russia. But you got to look at the Middle East. If this works, it will be a strong action on peacemaking. I think we've sort of seen the easy part first, but getting actual troops on the ground to maintain stability, getting Arab Gulf countries to step up is going to take a lot of deal-making skills and a lot of peace-building skills.
Following up on what Mark was saying about China, the biggest competitor, Kazuto, can I ask you how you see Trump's policy is heading, his policy vis-a-vis China, and who has the upper hand when they need to do the serious deal making? And how much space or sphere of influence do you see him ready to allow China to have if he gets something that he wants to have?
Well, first of all, I think the other day there was an article in the Foreign Affairs saying that there's no Chinese, the Trump-China strategy. There are transactional, tactical negotiation. Well, currently there is a negotiation going on between United States and China. Possibly the Trump is going to meet with Xi Jinping in APEC. But recently, or a few days ago, the Trump has finally snapped and say, adding 100% tariffs. So I think there's a lot of, twists and turns. Largely, it's very transactional. It's part of the negotiation. But on the other hand, structurally speaking, the United States has less leverage than China. China has a very strong leverage on the rare earth mineral, which is just tackling the vulnerability of the American industry and American economic system. If there is, the Americans depend too heavily on of the rare earth mineral on China, so that if there is no supply of the rare earth mineral, and especially China has strengthened the export control and does not allow the use of the rare earth mineral for the military. That is very much of the problematic for the American industry, because the rare earth, the American defense industry heavily depend on the rare earth from China. So this is a choke point. But on the other hand, the Americans do not have a choke point against China. The market, for example, the soybeans used to be the choke point, but now China has shifted the imports from United States to Brazil and Argentina. So now China is increasingly become more autonomous to United States and less dependent on United States. Therefore, when they are the China and the United States face to face with in the tariffs negotiation, the Chinese has more leverage against United States. Therefore, President Trump has made a couple of concessions, such as not providing the arms to Taiwan, or to allow the H20, which is the NVIDIA chips, to China. So there are a number of concessions have made, but China has not changed the position on the rare earth. Therefore, Mr. Trump has launched this 100% tariff as another card or another leverage, because there is an assumption that China depends on the U.S. market. The problem is that China is less dependent on the U.S. market. Therefore, this 100% tariff is not really having an effect. I don't know how Xi Jinping will take it, but I think this is the current situation. It's ongoing negotiation, so who knows what's coming up. But basically, I think the current imbalances of this negotiation and the tactics, Mr. Trump needs to recognize that he is losing this negotiation now.
Well, we can talk all day about China as well, but Glenn, how do you see the mechanism of traditional alliance system fit in this new environment? Is it an outdated legacy, or is it still working if there's a update and reform?
Well, I think that the 80 years after the end of World War II, the various international institutions and alliances that the U.S. has built, that does need some updating and modernization. So I don't think that the system in place was perfect by any means, but I think, frankly, that this administration is trying to undo everything. I think that whether it's NATO or other bilateral or multilateral arrangements, withdrawing from USAID, for instance, withdrawing from international organizations, really weakens the United States' ability. And I mean, clearly the U.S. has strong military hardware power, but in terms of the soft power that the U.S. has maintained, I think we're really losing that. And by applying tariffs, that is also alienating many of our country partners and allies. So I think in many respects, the U.S. is shooting itself in his own foot. I actually think that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are quite happy with what is happening in the United States. The U.S. is really turning more inward, doesn't have a long-term strategy. And I agree that with Katsuto that the Chinese have an advantage because they do have a long-term strategy. They do have continuity. And they are making inroads with the global south and other countries by maintaining that China, is the country that will provide for stability, predictability, and trade and investment. So I frankly think that the U.S. is weakening itself. Now, it is true, as Mark says, that by encouraging NATO and Japan and South Korea and others to increase their defense expenditures, that we can expect more burden sharing, as one might call it. But I don't necessarily think that this is going to result in the kind of world that Mr. Trump is looking for. I think these other countries have their own interests, their own priorities and policies. And I think that, some people in the Trump administration are going to other countries saying you have to choose between the United States and China, which I think is a very unproductive way to go about things. I mean, if you go to Southeast Asia, no country wants to choose between China and the United States. They want to be able to trade and invest and do business with both. And I think for countries in Asia, it's impossible for them to cut their ties with China. So I think the U.S. needs to have a much more strategic, long-term policy dealing with China, and that will get the cooperation of our allies in in terms of incentives as opposed to penalizing them with tariffs.
Thank you. Joshua, if you could wrap up this section of the discussion, what do you think, how do you think Trump is reshaping the global order and the global balance of power? And if this MAGA trend persists in the US after 2028, and if it spreads globally and become a mainstream in the world, what kind of world are we going to see?
Let me be very clear. I think it's already spread. You talked about the domestic politics in Japan. The reason we have a problem in Japan right now is not just because Takaichi's weak and the LDP chose someone to try to shore up the base. It's because you had the Sanseito party emerge out of nowhere from YouTube. So I think it's mainstream. Look at Argentina, look at Europe. I think what's different here, and to your point, I want to just kind of double click on some of what my colleagues have already said. I don't think Trump is thinking about the rest of the world. Like the whole point about making America great again and putting America first is that he's focused very much on America and our neighborhood. So if you're Canada and Mexico, you're in big trouble. If you're in Russia and you're in China, yes, he's going to deal with you and he wants things from you, and it's very transactional. But I think, as others have already said much better than I can, he's kind of not playing that game very well. And so the question becomes, if I'm Japan and I have hooked my proverbial ship up to the American wagon, because after the end of World War II, there was a kind of a clear alignment of interest, what does that mean for the future? And I think the big question is Trump's view of the world and the MAGA Republican viewpoint one and the same, so that after 2028, I don't think we're reversing back. I don't think we're going to suddenly go back to the days of the U.S.-Japan alliance in the 1980s, 1990s, or even 2010 at this point in time. And so the question is, with an America that is no longer going to go back to a free trading world of TPP and has gotten used to these tariffs, what's that middle ground look like? And I think that is a world in which Japan is certainly more of an independent actor. And I think, one thing we haven't talked about yet besides China is, what is the rest of the world doing? Because I kind of put Japan at one end of the spectrum, and then I put countries like India and Brazil at the other end. They have decided to directly challenge, but not directly attack. And there's a difference between watching the personalities play themselves out. This is not a world of institutions anymore. This is a world of personalities. And that's a world in which I think Putin and Xi feel much more comfortable. And in fact, in many ways, Trump would feel more comfortable with them than he would with certain other leaders. And I think the question becomes, how do we manage that in a world that was set up post-World War II in the so-called international liberal order? And so clearly that order is not serving any of us. But the question is, are there other actors? Glenn referenced the idea of hard and soft power. Trump is absolutely in the hard power camp, and he wants to do things transactionally, as I said before, when it comes to the economy, when it comes to the military. But there is a role for soft power, right? today's a holiday both in America and in Japan. It's also the last day of the World Expo that everyone said was going to be a disaster in Japan. Instead, you showed the world that there is omotenashi in Japan. There is soft power. The question is, if you're dealing with a bully, how do you use that? It doesn't do any good when you're dealing with someone who's beating you up when you're playing chess if you're not actually in the game. And so we already talked about where the Democrats are. They're in some ways the most important check in terms of domestically. But where's the private sector? Where are the CEOs? Because as one of the first CEO presidents we've had who really listens more to his business billionaire friends and buddies here in New York and other places, that's where, if I was Japanese, and in terms of thinking about $550 billion, that's where I would be focusing, because Trump is actually very interested in figuring out how to make those deals. And so as a deal maker, how do you do that? Very different than what we've seen before in terms of alliance management. That is not what President Trump seems to be interested in.
Well, thank you. That was the perfect cue to move on to the third part, the last part, that it's the discussion on the U.S.-Japan relations and the role of Japan. So, Mark, can you first tell us how Trump evaluate his recent agreement with Japan on trade and investment, and whether that's really helping the U.S. Becoming great again, and more broadly, how does this Trump and his administration views the use of Japan or the U.S.-Japan relations alliance?
Well, I would say, first of all, I'm not in support of having 15% across the board tariffs, but that was the mentality he came in the office with. He's been talking about it for decades. So I think he views it probably as something that we needed to get done and get by, so now we can talk about bigger things. But if you think of the perspective from Japan, it was kind of shocking. But even from the U.S., there was more kid gloves going with our negotiations with Japan than there were with other countries, because of how much we understand and respect the importance of this relationship. So I think Japan needs to be confident, but America and Trump respect strength. So making sure that militarily, economically, technologically, that we're investing in that in Japan, and then being expected to be treated more with the respect that a strong country in those aspects would make. There's going to be a keen eye on looking at not just militarily, are you investing in it, but are you interoperable? I mean, if you look at the military, the branches are not working together in the same way that the cohesiveness that you would have within America. If you look at technologically, the one thing I took from the opening session was the little amount that's being invested in R&D. So I think there is a lot of investment there. Besides this overwhelming change of world order, technology is going to rock the world. And right now, it's going to be U.S. and China. And I would disagree with Glenn to one aspect. Countries are going to have to choose whether they have Huawei in the back room or whether they have someone else. And if they do have Chinese too much in their technology stack, U.S. is not going to play with them. So U.S. will decide that we're not going to play there. So I think there's an opportunity really for Japan to be a real partner in that and bring in their hardware skills with a lot of the digital things we have, and things like robotics is a big opportunity.
Glenn, do you want to respond to that? And also, what do you think is the role of Japan that it's going to be not just beneficial to Trump, but to the region and to the world?
Well, my observation is that until 2016-17, Japan really felt that it could continue its reliance on the United States. Since then, I think there are a lot of questions about to what extent the United States is a reliable partner and ally, to what extent the United States would go to the defense of Taiwan or a defense of Japan if Japan faces security issues. So I think Japan is consciously trying to diversify or make friends with NATO, with Australia, with India, with South Korea, and other countries because they feel the United States is not as dependable as they thought it was. I think that, as Mark mentioned, the potential for U.S.-Japan cooperation on the security as well as on the economic side and technology side is quite significant. And I think that's an area, a positive area, that we should try to examine. In fact, right now at Stanford, I'm looking at the relationship between Silicon Valley and Japan, because I think the hardware capabilities of Japan and the software services capabilities of the United States is a very powerful combination that the two countries can benefit from. So I do think that there is a lot of potential for cooperation, but I also think that the U.S. needs to be more fully understanding of what's going on in Japan, the complexities of what's going on in Japan. I was not encouraged when the president sent out an X message congratulating the new woman prime minister of Japan, because she is not yet the prime minister. She's the president of the LDP, but not the prime minister of Japan. And that, I think, tweet indicates his level of understanding about what's going on in Japan.
Thank you. Joshua, in the bilateral relations with Trump, does Japan have any leverage? And is Japan using that from your view? And also, if you could tie this discussion to the, somehow to the opening session, the debate about Pax Japonica, can Japan be a front runner in dealing with Trump, or are you concerned with the lack of proactiveness or the lack of speed in Japan's response?
You set me up really well there, Junko, because you know what I'm going to say, which is, of course, Japan has to be at the front lines. If Japan can't manage Trump, then I don't think anybody can. And that isn't a statement about an individual. As I've already said, we really miss Shinzo Abe at this time. No matter what you think about his politics, his ability to kind of masterfully flatter, kind of misdirect or direct in different ways, it really is kind of the amazing ability. You know, I grew up in Japan, as many of you know, and I've always studied Aikido, not because, you know, Aikido is the only way, but it's something where you use the force of your opponent to be used against you. It's kind of a gyaku, just like you have in judo. And I think that's what Japan is best at doing. And meeting force with force is not going to work for Japan. That's what China is currently attempting, as Mark has already laid out. But I think the point here is I have a lot of optimism for Japan. I don't have much optimism for Japanese politics. And that's a little bit the way I feel about America right now. I have great optimism. I think America is never a country you want to bet against. I think the resiliency that we've demonstrated, our economy has demonstrated through world wars, through natural disasters, through COVID pandemic. But I think that we're reaching the end of the road of kind of only focusing on Washington as being the place where all answers come, because now it's become theater where basically it's entertainment and it's not where people go to get real solutions. As Glenn just talked about, some of the greatest solutions are not coming out of Washington because they're coming from Silicon Valley. The question for Japan is, where is that going to come from? So if whoever the next prime minister is, whether that's Takaichi or Tamaki or somebody else that we don't even know about, is that person going to be able to manage Trump? I'm worried because I think that when you select the new prime minister next week, they have less than a week to prepare. Ishiba took, you know, however many hours it was, and that was a great meeting in the Oval Office in February. But I think you got lucky. I think you went on a Friday. It was right after Israel's visit. There were a lot of things that could have gone wrong there. So I think that this concept that the entire conference is talking about of Pax Japonica is a really important one, but it's also aspirational. And I think we have to be very realistic because we are dealing with a real estate developer who's very transactional in the short term. So if you are not ready to play by hard power rules over the next 6 months, you're going to have some bruises to show for it. And so I think that we need to really learn from what Japan does best in terms of its intentionality to be able to use ways of directing and taking the force and the blunt force coming your way. And also, you asked the question, Junko, does Japan have leverage? Absolutely. Look at how many jobs Japanese companies give to Americans. Look how much investment is coming, and now you're being asked to give another $550 billion. The problem is Japanese are making those investments, but they're not telling their story. Japan is one of the worst countries in the world at telling its own stories. It's horrible at PR because it's not part of your culture. And it's why I love you. It's why I love Japan. But in this world of transactionalism, in a world in which the loudest voices get heard, Japan has to raise its voice. And if Japanese themselves won't do it, then your friends are going to have to do it even louder. And I think that's what this stage, that's what this conference is about. So I hope we can do that together. Sorry, I was a little long-winded.
Well, thank you for the passionate take. And finally, Kazuto-san, can you make a quick statement? If Japan ready to live up to the expectation?
I think, yes, indeed. Japan has, I fully agree with Josh that Japan should create its own story and make sure that, we can speak louder to announce that what we have, what we can do. And, Japan can play a lot of roles that, because of the credibility of the United States is going down. But, Japan helps that to patch that things out, especially in Southeast Asia. And I think there's a lot of things that Japan can offer. So we need to speak louder and to make sure that Japan takes the leadership in sort of to fill the void that United States created. For example, the cutting in USAID, and there's a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, Pacific Islands, is suffering from the lack of support.
Well, thank you. As we move on to Q&A, while you're thinking about your questions, can I ask each speaker to speak for just 10 seconds, summing up your message to Japan, just one keyword, if you could. Maybe you're going to start from Kazuto and go this way. Sorry.
10 seconds. Oh, house in order. Japan needs to figure out who's going to be a prime minister or whoever, but just not think of its own house, but make your house in order and to send a message.
Great. Mark?
My one word would be multiplier. I mean, Japan has always been a multiplier for the things we care about in the West, whether it be better relationships with Southeast Asia, the softer side of power. I would say multiplier is my word.
Glenn?
So I think Japan needs to put its political house in order, but find a better way to deal with the United States. I think there needs to be a reassessment in Japan how to effectively deal with the United States.
Great. Joshua?
I think you already heard it, but instead, we don't need Japan to be cool. We don't need any more cool Japan. What we need is a trusted Japan. It needs to step up on the international stage, and it needs to have confidence in itself. So let's go from cool Japan to trusted Japan.
Thank you. Great. These are the souvenirs from this session that you can all take. Well, finally, let me open the floor to the questions. Okay. So start from you, please. Please mention your name, affiliation, and if you are directing your question to any particular speaker, please mention that as well.
All right. Thank you for your great insights. My name is Obata, Japanese maritime robotics startup company CEO. And I have some questions about the economic security policy, both in the States and Japan. Because as a startup player, we're under the severe control of the trade control, export control, and the procurement process for the government bodies. We are really experiencing what the economic security is. But for the longer term, what do you think is the end state of the economic security policy in both countries? Because I do not really think about how it becomes in the next 10 years when the control becomes much more severe than now. I just want to ask for your advice. How we should be prepared for the changes as a player. Thank you. Oh, actually, Imrani, I just want to get insight from both ends, the States and Japan.
So I'll take it just too quick. The economic security is basically to make sure that you are not being coerced by economic means. So, stopping rare earth by China makes you coerced. So you need to diversify the supply chain. Even though it is expensive, you need to choose the other suppliers to make sure that you have the alternatives. So Japan and the United States are working together. The $550 billion is to make sure that we can build up our resilience together to United States and Japan to make sure that we do depend on the semiconductor, the energy, etc. So that is the end state. To be more resilient, to be less dependent on the more hostile countries.
Okay, because of the limited time, we're going to take 2 questions at a time and bundle them. Sir? Yeah, in the front.
Thank you. My question goes to Mr. Mark Kennedy. You talked about reindustrialization from the very beginning, but to work in industry, manufacturing sector needs diligence, patience, and ready to work in non-flashy sector. But that kind of feeling is long forgotten in the US. So will the US mindset of the people will come back to ready for reindustrialization? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. This is Aisha from Oman. I have a question for anyone on the panel who'd like to answer. You spoke about burden sharing and the US wanting NATO and the Middle East to take more of the costs of their own defense. But trust is an important issue in conflict resolution and mitigating conflicts, especially in a region like the Middle East. With the recent so-called 12-day war in Iran in mid-June and also the attacks in Qatar, we've seen that the perception of the US in the Middle East has changed dramatically, not to mention the last 2 years with what's happening in Gaza. What do you think Japan and the US, how do you think they're looking at these changing perceptions from the Middle Eastern perspective? We've seen that already Pakistan and by extension China are benefiting from these last 2 events. So does Japan appreciate that there's a seismic shift in the Middle East, and what are they doing about it, in your opinion?
Thank you. So Mark, for the first question.
Well, let me just say to the first question, bifurcation is happening whether you want to believe it or not. The world is dividing into 2 tech spheres, and you're going to need to decide which you're in, and hopefully Japan stays within us. To your question about manufacturing, we don't need to manufacture everything. We just need to manufacture what we would miss if we were in a conflict in Taiwan. So toys and all that stuff. The other thing is, if it's low margin, high labor content, we need to rely on allies. So the idea that you're going to bring everything back to America it can't happen, to your point. We don't have the workers. But we also need to be using robotics more. China is using more robotics than we are, and they have a lower wage level than us. So we, Japan and America, need to go more into robotics. I don't like the word burden sharing, and I appreciate you bringing up the word trust. If Japan is only spending 2% of its GDP on defense, it trusts America too much. If Middle East is counting on America to come in and swoop in and solve their problems, it is trusting America too much. So it's not burden sharing. It's, are you being responsible for your own security? Are you being responsible for your own economic drive? So I think that's really what I would say to that.
Joshua, you're expert on Middle East as well. Do you have a quick response to the second question?
Yeah, there's a lot I have to say there. I think the question was, what can the U.S. and Japan do? I think that right now the U.S. administration isn't even considering or thinking about Japan. Japan is kind of missing in action, whereas China has made a very clear focus and trying to use opportunities to exploit and using the access from Iran and the disaffected area. And I think given what's happened in Gaza, the U.S. is really alone in many different ways. I don't think the Japanese population supports what the American position is here. And I think that's actually a big problem for the government in Japan. And if you have a Takaichi with an Aso supporting behind her, it might become more pro-Israeli than pro-Palestinian. That's going to cause major trouble inside of Japan. So I think the question is, right now, in the short term, it looks like Israel and America are winning with what just happened in Iran and Qatar and other places. But I think the question is, over the long term, you may win a battle, but if you can't win the war, you're never going to win the hearts and mind of people by starving them and committing the atrocious acts we've seen at different points in time on both sides, right? Hamas's attack on October 7th and some of the repercussions we've seen. And so I think the trouble is, will Netanyahu survive in Israel? What comes next for a democratic and open system in Israel? And how is Japan, which has always had a very interesting relationship with Israel and the Middle East? Most people don't realize how much Japan supports the Palestinian Authority and the people through Syria, through Jordan, other places. I think we need to have that. But I can tell you right now in Washington, there is a complete separation. Japan is in the Indo-Pacific. It's in Asia. It has really no role in the Middle East because it has zero hard power. It has no intelligence. Whereas the economic side, it's one of the largest investors. And even Korea is beating Japan because they tell their story better. So I return back to where we came with this.
Good point. Thanks. So, to the gentleman in the back.
Yeah, I'm Paul from Singapore. I used to work in the U.S. Senate in the old Republican Party. So the thing that we don't mention is the U.S. has a huge surplus in basically services. In tech and in services, we have a surplus which isn't being talked about with the tariff. And this tariff is the largest consumer tax in American history, competing with Smoot-Hawley from the Great Depression. And as a supply chain guy, the inflation is coming next year. It's getting passed on. We just haven't seen it yet. There's a lag effect. But normally, we would have institutional pushback from both Republicans and Democrats in Congress because it's a taxing power, or the court, but we're not seeing that. How do you see this developing next year, and will it affect the U.S. bond market if institutions don't counterbalance this?
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Leo. I'm an MBA student here at GLOBIS University. So my question is related about tariffs and how, as Joshua was saying before, Trump has been nothing but delivering his promises. But the thing is that it seems like the markets are reacting in a negative way. As of today, according to the Japan Times, the U.S. market is not even performing as the top 10 markets around the globe. So I would like to ask about anyone in the panel, what do you think about how this is going to affect long-term the Trump's policies?
And do you want to?
Well, I think actually Mark, having been a member of Congress, can answer the question more about the GOP. I think you're right that focusing only on goods is not correct from an economic point of view, and focusing on bilateral trade imbalances doesn't make too much sense. And so I think the tariff application by the administration is really, I believe it's self-defeating. I think it's alienating our partners and allies and friends, and I think it's going to create inflation in the United States. I don't think it's going to make America the manufacturing center of the world that Donald Trump thinks it's going to. I think the supply chains are much too complex to expect that companies are immediately going to manufacture in the United States simply because of the tariffs. So I think that eventually we will see pushback because the negative economic consequence of the tariffs will become clear, as well as the political consequences. I'm sure Mark has a different.
I would just say that if, unless the economists, what they've been teaching us for the last century are wrong, tariffs will create inflation and they will have a lot of negative consequences and it will negatively impact people's lives. And when it does, part of the reason Trump won was because of inflation. Part of the reason why he could lose the House next year is if inflation pops up. And then we can have a real argument as this whole tariff thing makes sense. It's been unorthodox up until now. Now we're viewing it for a temporary period as orthodox. The question is, will the results play out such that we can put it back in the unorthodox category?
Just one adding comment to Mark. I think we need to take into account the exchange rate. The Japanese exchange rate, Japanese yen is depreciated, therefore we can absorb change of the prices, and that doesn't reflect on the inflation or the price index in United States. But that leaves the United States dollar higher. So the appreciation of dollar is making it more difficult for the manufacturing goods to export from United States. So that is going against the Trump's demand or the wishes to regain the trade surpluses. So again, we need to take that exchange rate into account.
Good point. One quick last question.
Hello, my name is Dimitri. I'm a student here at Globis. I also work in a Japanese real estate company. I prioritize in selling real estate to primarily foreigners. My question is about globalization. Due to the Trump administration and Sanseito, who are anti-globalization, my question is, do you think these sort of views have any chance of success in the future when immigration has proven to be successful for America? So I'd like to ask if you think there's any chance for these kinds of political views. Thank you.
Does anyone have a quick answer?
I'm happy to jump in, Junko.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, let me just start with reframing it. I think it's actually really dangerous. Sanseito has been so effective at clickbait and coming out of YouTube that we got to be very careful. They're not Japan first. They are Japanese first. There are xenophobic and anti-immigrant areas to it. They are not just a conservative right-wing party. They basically don't want anybody to come into Japan. They want to take Japan back to the period of a kind of Shimaguni, where basically it was closed off. That makes sense for an island nation like Japan, where you have such a homogeneous population. They're playing with fire, and it's very effective. It's forcing Japanese politics to change in a very way that doesn't make any sense given the number of party seats they have. In America, you are 100% right. Immigration is what has led to America's strength. I think just in the way that Mark described the tariffs having an impact on the economy, immigration is going to have a big impact. This might be the first year we don't see a rise in the American population because the natural-born citizens in the U.S. are not going to be able to have the replacement rate that we've had and we've enjoyed because all the greatest talent in the world has come. And it's not just immigration, illegal immigration, which is obviously a very potent and successful issue for the president. It's also legal immigration, the H-1B visas, et cetera, where I think in many ways people are going to start voting with their feet. They're going to go to new universities. You're a perfect example at G1. Why aren't you in America right now? Why are people spending more time coming to Australia and other places? So I think this is something we definitely need to watch. The problem is, as Mark already alluded to, it takes time for these things to have an impact. And then by the time it has an impact and there's a political backlash, then it takes time again. So economics and political science don't necessarily live in harmony, and the time frames are very different. And the time frames get shorter the more we use social media, the more headlines are driven by breaking news everywhere, because nothing is really news anymore.
Thank you very much. Our time is up, so it's a wrap. Thank you very much for the great questions, and thank you for the great insights from the speakers.